Day in, day out, it's the same road we're walking down. Same job, same town, 'cause we've been told that's the way our world goes round. Walking on the grounds we've always known, stepping on the footprints in the snow. But when it melts, the other ways will show. We're gonna make the footsteps on our own. That life can wait, just for a while. That life can wait, so take that aside and just go on.
Hi everyone, today we will be doing a horrific history discussing the Radium Girls. These ladies had no idea that simply doing their job would expose them to such danger. If you see me looking down, I have my laptop down here and it is a hell of a lot of information, so I will be utilizing it. Okay, let's get started. In 1917, patriotic young ladies were thrilled to have landed a job helping the war effort. The pay was about 3 times the average rate for the time, and the work was very simple to do. Their job was to paint watch faces, instrument gauges, and the faces of clocks for the U.S. Radium Company. A thin layer of white paint blended with radium was layered onto the dials, which made them glow, making them easier to read while in a trencher at night. The ladies were told the paint was completely safe, so no safety precautions were used, leading them to handling and even ingesting countless doses of the radioactive material. Sorry, guys. They ingested it because they were instructed to lick the tip of their paintbrush to ensure that it remained at a fine point. Men working with similar radioactive materials were given lead aprons to diminish the risk, but the women were left completely and totally exposed. The radium-infused paint was first available in 1917, but the element was initially identified by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898. It took until 1910 for Marie to be able to isolate a sample to work with. Immediately, the Curies knew their discovery was the dangerous one. Marie got chemical burns mishandling the radium, and Pierre stated he didn't want to be in a room with even a kilogram of the stuff, as he feared he would go blind or burn off his skin. People at the time waived the risk because the Curies were handling large quantities of pure radium. However, they believed a small amount was good for their health. Radium was added to tonic water, toothpaste, and even cosmetics. Molly Maggie had to quit her job because she was ill. She had no clue what was causing her illness, though. It started with a toothache, so she had it removed by a dentist. Then the neighboring tooth began to feel the same way. She had that one extracted as well. Once removed, painful ulcers formed that seeped blood and pus constantly, making her breath horrible and leaving her in never-ending pain. This wasn't her only issue, though. She also had horrific pain in her arms and legs and eventually was unable to walk. The doctor told her it was rheumatism and sent her home with a damn aspirin. Okay, I have fibromyalgia. Aspirin don't do shit for pain. By May 1922, Molly was in dire straits. By this point, she had most of her teeth removed and the infection had spread. Her bottom jaw, the roof of her mouth, and even some bones in her ear were described as one large abscess. Side note, you may or may not know that I had absolutely horrible teeth. Very thin enamel, and I had a small abscess one time that turned into a bone infection in my jaw, and that is pain I would not wish on my worst enemy. I cannot imagine what she was going through. Alright, back to Molly. During another dentist appointment while examining her mouth, the dentist gently prodded Molly's jawbone, and to his absolute horror, it broke off in his hand. Days later, the same thing happened with the remainder of her lower jawbone. He did this not with surgery, but by simply placing his fingers on it. Poor Molly was falling apart, but sadly, by this time so was Grace Fryer and other radium girls. On September 12, 1922, the strange infection Molly had dealt with for the past year had tragically spread to the tissues of her throat and ate its way through her jugular vein. At 5 p.m. that day, she hemorrhaged so quickly that the nurse in her room was not able to stop the bleeding. She basically drowned in her own blood. I need a drink. Sorry, guys. She was only 24 years old. Oh, and to add insult to injury, her cause of death was listed as syphilis. Since the doctors were baffled as to what had caused it, and even worse, her former employer would use this cause of death to smear her name even more. United States Radium Company denied their part in the deaths for the next 2 freaking years. Their business was impacted by what they viewed as gossip surrounding the deaths. They hired an expert to look into the link between the deaths and their company. Unlike their own research highlighting the benefits of radium, this independent investigator confirmed the link between radium and the illness the woman was experiencing. This absolutely outraged the president of U.S. Radium Corporation. He paid for new studies to fall in line with the claims that it had nothing to do with making the women sick. On top of this, he lied to the Department of Labor, who was in the midst of investigating them due to the verdict of the original report. He also publicly dismissed the women by saying they were just after money and that their health issues were their own problems. With the damning report hidden, the women faced the near impossible task of showing the link between the mysterious illnesses and the radium they had handled and ingested hundreds of times a day. They all discussed and understood that the illness had to be linked to their work. They were battling the widespread belief that radium was 100% safe. It was only when a male employee died, of course, that experts finally realized, oh shit, we may want to check this out. In 1925, a brilliant doctor by the name of Harrison Martland created a test to prove once and for all that the women had been poisoned by radium. Martland also explained what was happening inside their bodies. As early as 1901, it was evident that radium could harm humans dramatically, even when applied externally. Martland discovered that when radium was used internally, even in tiny amounts, the damage was many thousands of times greater. Sorry guys, my throat is really dry. ASMR, just kidding. The ingested radium settled in the women's bodies and was now emitting constant and destructive radiation that was literally boring holes inside them while they were still alive. This attacked their entire body. One woman's spine was crushed by the radium. Another girl's jaw was eaten away to a mere stump, and another woman's legs shortened and spontaneously fractured. If that doesn't sound like the shit of nightmares, I don't know what does. Eerily, the damaged bones began to glow from the radium buried deep inside them, and the glow did not lie. Some of the women did not realize they had radium poisoning until they caught themselves in the mirror at night and saw a glowing ghost reflecting back at them. Could you imagine how terrifying that would be? This sealed their fate. Martland had realized that poisoning was fatal as it could not be removed from the poor woman's bones. The radium industry tried hard to discredit Martland's pioneering work. However, they underestimated the determination of the Radium Girls themselves. These women had banded together to fight, as dial painters were still being hired all across the U.S. Could you imagine seeing all your coworkers die and other factories were still hiring unsuspecting girls and women? I couldn't even imagine. Grace Fryer said of her fight, "I am thinking more of the hundreds of girls to whom this may serve as an example." Sorry, guys. Lost my place. Grace led the fight and was determined to find a lawyer, even though plenty had turned her down, as they didn't believe the girls, and also because they were scared to go against the powerful radium corporations. At that time, radium poisoning was not a compensable disease, and they had not known of its existence until the women began to fall ill. They were also held back by the statute of limitations, which ruled that victims of occupational poisoning had to take action within 2 years. Radium poisoning was insidious, but didn't generally begin to affect the women until 5 years after they had started working. Grace was not deterred by this, as she was the daughter of a union delegate and was determined to hold the guilty parties accountable. Thankfully, in 1927, a bright young lawyer, named Raymond Barry, accepted the case of Grace and 4 of her colleagues. The women had been given only 4 short months to live. And the company was intent on dragging the case out. Due to this, the women settled out of court. They had achieved their goal by raising the profile of radium poisoning and shifting the public's mindset on the safety or lack thereof when it came to radium. The New Jersey Radium Girls story was front-page news all across the country. In Illinois, a woman by the name of Catherine Wolfe read these headlines in horror, as she was employed as a dial painter. She recalled that there were meetings at her plant that were bordered on riots and that the chill of fear was so depressing that they would rarely work. The Illinois firm, sorry, I can't talk today, known as Radium Dial, followed the lead set by USRC and denied any and all responsibility. Although medical testing proved that the women were showing clear signs of radium poisoning, the company lied about the results and even took out a full-page ad in the local paper, which stated, "If we at any time had reason to believe that any conditions of the work endangered the health of our employees, we would have at once suspended operation." Sadly, it gets worse. Radium Dial went on to interfere with the girls' autopsies when the Illinois workers began to die. Company officials stole the radium-riddled bones in an effort to cover up their failure to provide a safe work environment. Can you imagine? A company had employees dying and was stealing their bones so that they could cover their ass. Unbelievable. The women who weren't killed by the same jaw problems that killed Molly and Maggie, they would develop sarcomas, which are huge cancerous bone tumors. In 1938, Catherine Wolfe, now Catherine Donahue, because she got married, began her fight for justice. She developed a grapefruit-sized tumor on her hip. She lost all her teeth and had to pick pieces of jawbone out of her mouth. She began to hold a patterned handkerchief to her jaw as to absorb the ever-oozing pus. She had also seen countless friends die, which focused and intensified her will to fight. She began this battle in the mid-1930s. When America was in the grip of the Great Depression, the community shunned them as they decided to go up against one of the business firms who were left standing. Although she was close to death, in 1938, Catherine ignored her doctor's advice and gave testimony from her deathbed. By doing this with the assistance of her lawyer, Leonard Grossman, who offered his services pro bono, which means he did this for free, she finally won justice for herself and countless other workers everywhere. The Radium Girls case was one of the very first in which a company was made responsible for the health of its employees. This led to life-preserving regulations and eventually the establishment of OSHA, which stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Before these regulations and safety standards were implemented, 14,000 people died on the job per year. Today, thankfully, that number has shrunk down to 4,500. These women left a legacy of workplace safety and also an invaluable impact on the scientific and medical field. The names of these women may be forgotten and omitted from most of history books, but their strength and determination should be an inspiration to us all. Sadly, radium has a half-life of 1,600 years, so the radium-embedded bones of these heroes are still glowing all these decades later and will continue to do so. That was the